My wife's friends thought abandoning me would be an unforgettable prank, and it was. Just not in the way they expected. That night became the beginning of my best revenge, being happy, far away from their miserable little lives. It wasn't the silence that scared me that day. It was what came before it. The laughter. The whispers. The way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. I just had no idea all of it had such a calculated purpose. I'm 35 years old and I've spent my whole adult life working as a mechanic. Cars make sense to me. People, on the other hand, don't. George, who's in his 50s, couldn't even change a tire without looking up a tutorial online, yet he walked around the shop calling me kid, like he was doing me a favor by letting me breathe the same air as him. Every time I solved a complicated issue, he'd jump in front of the customer and brag like the idea had been his. The truth is, the only talent he had was finding new ways to do absolutely nothing. Between the frustration at work and my wife Emily constantly complaining about how unsociable I was, my life was far from perfect. Even so, that year, she simply refused to take no for an answer. According to her, everyone wanted me to come along. I laughed internally. Nobody gets excited about having the quiet guy around, the one who makes sarcastic comments every time someone talks about positive energy. She gave me that look that means you've already lost the argument, even if you don't know it yet, and I ended up giving in. We left early on a Saturday morning in Lauren's SUV, one of Emily's friends. 6 people, 1 car, and an overdose of cheap perfume strong enough to make anyone nauseous. A few minutes after hitting the road, I already regretted everything. They were the kind of people who call literally any small inconvenience trauma. Emily sat up front, laughing with Lauren, while in the back all I could hear were whispers and little giggles. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, someone flashed a mocking smirk at me. The whole atmosphere felt strange, almost rehearsed. I tried to zone out by watching the trees pass outside the window, but something started to bother me. Whenever I talked, they went silent. Then they'd resume their conversation in hushed voices. Emily threw me that fake smile she always uses when she's lying. My gut told me something was off, but I ignored it. I figured they were planning some stupid group game, one of those bonding activities that are never actually fun. The farther we drove, the worse the phone signal got until it disappeared completely. The paved road turned into dirt, and then into a narrow trail that looked straight out of a horror movie. I made a joke about it, but nobody laughed. They just looked at each other. We finally arrived at the cabin, an old wooden structure in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by endless trees. No other houses in sight, just silence, pine trees, and humidity. As I unloaded the bags, they joked about feeling like they were on a survival reality show. Emily pointed out the rustic beauty of the place, creaking floors, dusty curtains, and a fireplace that probably hadn't worked in decades. During dinner, they exchanged inside jokes that completely excluded me. Every time I asked what was so funny, someone answered nothing with a smile that said otherwise. Emily was being overly attentive toward me, like she was afraid I'd lose my temper. When I offered to help clean up, Lauren replied with a mocking tone. "You've done enough for today, hero." I didn't understand the reference, but the discomfort in the room became undeniable. That night, as I lay down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. The laughter, the looks, the unnecessary backpacks, everything felt like part of a plan. I convinced myself I was overthinking it, that I was just tired. But deep down, something in my stomach told me things were about to end very badly. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. The silence was absolute. I assumed everyone was outside taking those typical social media photos, the ones with bare feet and cheesy captions about reconnecting with nature. I put on my pants and headed to the main room. No one was there. No footsteps, no voices, no backpacks. Everything that didn't belong to me was gone. I thought maybe they'd gone hiking until I noticed a yellow sticky note on the table. It said, "Builds character," along with a little hand-drawn smiley face. I froze for a few seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. That's when I heard the laughter outside. I ran to the window just in time to see the SUV driving away on the dirt road. Emily was in the passenger seat, her blonde hair blowing through the open window. Lauren was driving. In the back seat, someone was recording on their phone while all of them laughed hysterically like they were living the funniest moment of their lives. For a moment, everything felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. But within seconds, confusion gave way to a burning heat in my chest. Rage. I ran outside barefoot onto the porch and shouted, "Are you kidding me?" The car didn't stop. Their laughter disappeared among the trees, carried away with the dust kicked up by the tires as they drove off. I stood there completely alone, holding that crumpled note between my fingers, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. I swear I could still hear their laughter long after they disappeared among the trees. For a moment, I thought about grabbing my phone and calling someone, but one glance at the signal bar confirmed what I already knew: there was no service. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random, improvised prank, it had been carefully planned. The whispered conversations during the drive, the extra luggage, the forced smiles, the way Emily made sure I packed enough clothes, it all made sense now. I turned back toward the cabin and took a look at what they'd left behind. There was a bit of food in the fridge, canned soup, eggs, and a few basic supplies. They hadn't left me with nothing, but the intention was clear: they wanted me to panic. This wasn't funny. It wasn't a character-building exercise, like they loved to say. It was pure humiliation. For a moment, I considered walking back. But, to where, exactly? The nearest gas station had to be more than 30 kilometers away, and I didn't know the region. I wasn't about to wander into the forest like some lost hiker just to prove a point. We were almost 450 kilometers from home. So I sat down on the porch and let the initial anger melt into something else, an unexpected calm. For the first time in years, I didn't have to do anything. No one asking for favors, no orders being barked at me, no phone buzzing nonstop. Just silence. I stood up, stretched, and looked out toward the forest spreading in front of me. "All right then," I muttered. "Let's see what kind of character you expect me to build." I walked back into the cabin and inspected every corner. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a main living area with a fireplace, and a small kitchen. The pantry held enough canned goods for me to survive a week or 2 if I rationed well. I also found an old toolbox, flashlights, and a large box of matches. Out back, there was a covered porch stacked with chopped firewood, a rusty shovel, and several empty propane tanks. Whoever had lived there before clearly knew how to survive in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't about to give my wife and her friends the show they wanted. They expected me to break down, to beg for help, maybe even cry. They were wrong. What they didn't understand was that, deep down, they were giving me exactly what I had needed for years: silence. No boss breathing down my neck, no Lauren judging me for not being emotional enough after a long day at the shop. Just me and the wind rustling the trees. I cleaned the kitchen a bit, found an old percolator, and made coffee. I drank it while looking out the window, hot, uninterrupted. I hadn't enjoyed something so simple in years. Later, I explored the property. Behind the cabin was a small shed covered in vines, looking like it had been abandoned for decades. The padlock was completely rusted, so I decided to check it later. The day passed slowly, but in a good way. I found a couple of fishing rods leaning against the porch and decided that the next day I'd check out the nearby stream. When the sky started turning orange, I went back inside. They thought this would break me. They didn't understand that I'd already been broken for a long time. The job, the constant noise, the fake smiles, all of it had worn me down. But this was different. This felt like a restart. When night fell, I had a fire going, a hot meal, and most importantly, silence. I dropped onto the old sofa as the crackling of the fire filled the room. "I guess it's my turn to build some character," I whispered. And this time it's not just an empty phrase. And I meant it. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm. No engines revving, no yelling, no boss screaming my name from across the shop. Just the wind and the soft ticking of an old clock. For a moment, I lay still, staring at the ceiling, soaking in the absolute freedom of not owing anything to anyone. After breakfast, I decided to explore the interior more carefully. On a shelf, I found a stack of dusty leather-bound journals with pages yellowed by time. Curiosity 1. I sat down and began flipping through them. Most were from decades ago, written by a family who used to spend their summers there. There were handwritten notes about fishing spots, nearby trails, and a small village about 25 kilometers south. One of the last journals, dated in the early 2000s, belonged to a man who wrote about catching trout in the stream and boiling water to drink. He had even drawn a rough map of the area. The guy loved that place, and I understood why. By the afternoon, I had organized my supplies, made a list of priorities, and fixed the squeaky hinge on the door. Working with my own hands, with no one supervising me, made me feel alive again. When the sun began to slip behind the trees, I grabbed an old chair and sat on the porch to enjoy the cool air. That's when I saw it, a flash of white light between the trees, far too sharp to be a campfire. It was a flashlight, moving slowly, as if someone was walking toward the cabin. My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought Emily or one of the others had come back, finally realizing how stupid their stunt had been. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was just a solitary silhouette. A man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a flannel jacket and a hat. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a wrench I had used earlier, and stood on the porch. He raised one hand. "Easy." "Good evening, son," he said in a deep, calm voice. "Didn't mean to scare you." I didn't fully lower my guard, but my grip on the tool loosened a little. "You're far from town, aren't you?" I asked. He smiled. "So are you." He stepped into the porch light. He was a gray-bearded man, weathered face, steady eyes, the kind of look someone gets after seeing too much in life and no longer being surprised by anything. "Name's Frank," he said. "Live a few miles that way. Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday and figured someone had moved back into the cabin." I leaned against the railing. "Moved in is one way to put it." Then I told him everything, the trip, the supposed character lesson, the car driving away, the laughter. He listened without interrupting, shaking his head occasionally with a mix of resignation and disbelief. When I finished, he let out a short, dry laugh, not mocking, but the tired laugh of someone who's witnessed this kind of behavior before. "You married the wrong person, son." "Don't even get me started," I replied. "They called it a joke." He chuckled again. "I'd call it freedom." And for the first time in a very long time, I completely agreed with someone. "It's one way to look at it," Frank said in a calm tone, like he'd chewed on that thought for hours before speaking it aloud. "You doing all right out here?" "Yeah," I said with a half smile. "I've got food, water, and silence. Mostly the silence." Frank nodded slowly, with that expression of someone who's spent far too much time alone and learned to appreciate the weight of quiet. "Silence is funny," he finally said. "It doesn't just stay with you, it strips you down. Shows you who you are when there's no one left around to distract you." He adjusted the old canvas bag hanging from his shoulder, moving with slow, practiced motions, the kind you repeat hundreds of times until they turn into instinct. He opened the flap and began pulling things out, a couple of dented cans, still sealed, a handheld flashlight, and a small pack of batteries wrapped with tape. "Here," he said, extending them to me. "Figured you might need the basics." "You always bring gifts to strangers?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, still surprised by his generosity. He let out a short, quiet chuckle, like laughing wasn't something he did often. "Only to the ones who look like they need it." He shrugged. "I've got plenty. And you, well, it's obvious you could use some. You don't owe me anything, just don't die out here." I let out a genuine laugh. It had been days since I'd laughed like that. "Deal." Frank pointed his flashlight toward the back of the cabin, where the vegetation grew denser and the night felt heavier. "There's a shed back there," he said. "Belonged to the old owners. If you're lucky, you might find something useful inside. Tools, maybe. But be careful, the roof's half collapsed, and one wrong step could bring the whole thing down." "Thanks for the warning." He nodded silently, switched on his flashlight again, and disappeared among the trees with steady steps, like someone who knew that forest better than the back of his own hand. The next morning, when the sun was barely peeking through the tall canopy, I decided to follow his instructions. I walked slowly through the thick vines and twisted branches that seemed to close in on me. The shed was almost swallowed by vegetation. Roots crawled up the walls, and the shrubs wrapped around it like they were trying to hide it from the world. The door hung from a rusted hinge, and an old padlock dangled uselessly. One firm pull was enough to break everything loose. Inside, the air smelled of old dust, rancid oil, and decaying wood, the scent of something forgotten for far too long. My eyes stopped on a large shape covered by a heavy tarp. My heart picked up speed as I approached, like I already knew what I was about to find. I lifted the tarp with both hands, and there it was. A mid-70s Ford Mustang, maybe a 73, coated in rust, grime, and cobwebs, yet still unmistakably imposing. It was the kind of car that keeps its dignity even after being abandoned. A sleeping giant. The keys hung from a nail beside the door, as if someone had promised to come back one day. Working with my own hands, with no one supervising me, made me feel alive again. When the sun began to slip behind the trees, I grabbed an old chair and sat on the porch to enjoy the cool air. That's when I saw it, a flash of white light between the trees, far too sharp to be a campfire. It was a flashlight, moving slowly, as if someone was walking toward the cabin. My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought Emily or one of the others had come back, finally realizing how stupid their stunt had been. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was just a solitary silhouette. A man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a flannel jacket and a hat. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a wrench I had used earlier, and stood on the porch. He raised one hand. "Easy." "Good evening, son," he said in a deep, calm voice. "Didn't mean to scare you." I didn't fully lower my guard, but my grip on the tool loosened a little. "You're far from town, aren't you?" I asked. He smiled. "So are you." He stepped into the porch light. He was a gray-bearded man, weathered face, steady eyes, the kind of look someone gets after seeing too much in life and no longer being surprised by anything. "Name's Frank," he said. "Live a few miles that way. Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday and figured someone had moved back into the cabin." I leaned against the railing. Moved in is one way to put it. Then I told him everything, the trip, the supposed character lesson, the car driving away, the laughter. He listened without interrupting, shaking his head occasionally with a mix of resignation and disbelief. When I finished, he let out a short, dry laugh, not mocking, but the tired laugh of someone who's witnessed this kind of behavior before. "You married the wrong person, son." "Don't even get me started," I replied. "They called it a joke." He chuckled again. "I'd call it freedom." And for the first time in a very long time, I completely agreed with someone. "It's one way to look at it," Frank said in a calm tone, like he'd chewed on that thought for hours before speaking it aloud. "You doing all right out here?" "Yeah," I said with a half smile. "I've got food, water, and silence. Mostly the silence." Frank nodded slowly, with that expression of someone who's spent far too much time alone and learned to appreciate the weight of quiet. "Silence is funny," he finally said. "It doesn't just stay with you, it strips you down. Shows you who you are when there's no one left around to distract you." He adjusted the old canvas bag hanging from his shoulder, moving with slow, practiced motions, the kind you repeat hundreds of times until they turn into instinct. He opened the flap and began pulling things out, a couple of dented cans, still sealed, a handheld flashlight, and a small pack of batteries wrapped with tape. "Here," he said, extending them to me. "Figured you might need the basics." "You always bring gifts to strangers?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, still surprised by his generosity. He let out a short, quiet chuckle, like laughing wasn't something he did often. "Only to the ones who look like they need it." He shrugged. "I've got plenty. And you, well, it's obvious you could use some. You don't owe me anything, just don't die out here." I let out a genuine laugh. It had been days since I'd laughed like that. "Deal." Frank pointed his flashlight toward the back of the cabin, where the vegetation grew denser and the night felt heavier. "There's a shed back there," he said. "Belonged to the old owners. If you're lucky, you might find something useful inside. Tools, maybe. But be careful, the roof's half collapsed, and one wrong step could bring the whole thing down. Thanks for the warning. He nodded silently, switched on his flashlight again, and disappeared among the trees with steady steps, like someone who knew that forest better than the back of his own hand. The next morning, when the sun was barely peeking through the tall canopy, I decided to follow his instructions. I walked slowly through the thick vines and twisted branches that seemed to close in on me. The shed was almost swallowed by vegetation. Roots crawled up the walls, and the shrubs wrapped around it like they were trying to hide it from the world. The door hung from a rusted hinge, and an old padlock dangled uselessly. One firm pull was enough to break everything loose. Inside, the air smelled of old dust, rancid oil, and decaying wood, the scent of something forgotten for far too long. My eyes stopped on a large shape covered by a heavy tarp. My heart picked up speed as I approached, like I already knew what I was about to find. I lifted the tarp with both hands, and there it was. A mid-70s Ford Mustang, maybe a 73, coated in rust, grime, and cobwebs, yet still unmistakably imposing. It was the kind of car that keeps its dignity even after being abandoned. A sleeping giant. The keys hung from a nail beside the door, as if someone had promised to come back one day. And as I turned off the engine and listened to the echo fade away, I understood something. That was the first day of my new life. When I reached the small village, a few people were chatting outside the diner, and a man was sweeping the front steps. The moment the Mustang rolled in, every head turned toward me. I parked right in front and stepped out without caring about the grease stains on my clothes. As soon as I set foot on the main street, my phone vibrated. 3 bars of signal appeared on the screen, like they'd been waiting for me to escape the middle of nowhere before coming back to life. A woman in her 50s, gray-haired and wearing a stained apron, came out wiping her hands. "Did you drive that car all the way here?" she asked, curious. "Only from the forest," I replied. "Brought it back to life." Inside, the smell of fresh coffee, bacon, and fried food filled the air. I ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu and devoured it without thinking twice. The waitress kept watching me, as if waiting for the right moment to start a conversation. I finally lifted my eyes and gave her an opening. "You can ask." "You new around here?" she said carefully. "Sort of. Got left behind in a cabin up north." Her eyebrows shot up. "They left you?" "Yep," I said. "Long story involving bad moods and even worse friends." She laughed sincerely. "You wouldn't be the first guy someone dumps out here." "You staying?" "Maybe. I'm thinking about it." When I finished eating, the owner came out from the kitchen. A big man with a beard so thick it looked like it could filter rocks. "Did I hear you fix cars?" he asked. "Yeah. Been a mechanic since before YouTube started teaching people how to do everything the wrong way," I joked. He let out a loud laugh. "You free tomorrow morning?" "I've got a pickup that's giving me trouble. Can't afford a shop right now." "Sure, I can take a look. I'll pay you cash and throw in breakfast." "Deal," I said. Best offer I've had in years. When I stepped out of the diner, the sun was already high, and the Mustang glowed as if it knew it still had a purpose. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped or frustrated. I wasn't seeking anyone's approval. I was simply carving my own path, and it was freeing. The next morning, I arrived before dawn. The owner, Sean, was already outside, wiping his hands with a rag and staring at an old blue pickup parked behind the building. "Morning," I greeted, stretching. "Morning," he grumbled. "Guess you weren't lying about coming early." "I'm a mechanic," I replied. "We're born tired." The truck was in terrible shape. After 20 minutes of inspecting it, I found the issue: a cracked fuel line and a damaged gasket. I told him I could fix it if he didn't mind some creative solutions. "Creative sounds cheaper than new parts," he said with a grin. An hour later, the engine roared like it had shaved 20 years off. Sean stared at it in amazement, like he'd witnessed a miracle. "You're hired," he said without hesitation. "I'll pay cash if you help me a few days a week. No one around here knows how to do things right." "I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon," I replied. "Perfect. He paid me on the spot and served me another breakfast. Word spread faster than an oil spill on concrete. By the third day, a guy from the gas station came asking me to check his Jeep. Then another man from the general store showed up saying his cousin's van wouldn't start. In no time, I had a steady line of people wanting their vehicles fixed. Folks started calling me the abandoned mechanic, but not in a mocking way. There was respect in the tone. I'd fix the cars, we'd sit down for coffee or lunch, and with each interaction, I felt more at home. A man named Connor, who owned the hardware store, offered me a small shed behind his shop to use as a garage. I cleaned it out, organized my tools, and within days it looked like a real little workshop. My hands were cracked, my clothes ruined, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd smiled so much. Out there, repairs weren't just transactions. It wasn't about fixing, charging, and leaving. People shook your hand, looked you in the eye, and said thank you like they truly meant it. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that kind of simple respect. Several days passed before I even looked at my phone again. I'd turned it off. When I turned it back on, the screen filled with notifications, 47 unread messages, 13 missed calls, and several voicemails. The first ones were from Emily. Very funny. You've proven your point. Come back now. You're overreacting. Stay a few days if you want, but at least text me so people stop asking about you. Then her tone shifted. You're embarrassing me. Everyone keeps asking. This is humiliating. Stop acting like a child. If you wanted attention, you could have just said so. I read every word and laughed silently. She had no idea what was going on in my mind. To her, everything was still a temporary game. She couldn't even conceive the possibility that maybe I didn't want to come back. I turned the phone off, wiped my hands on a rag, and went back to the carburetor I'd been tuning for days. The smell of oil and metal was 1,000 times better than the expensive perfume that used to cling to the air of my old life. After a week, I realized something unexpected. I hadn't thought about home even once, not about my job, not about Emily, not about the constant noise. Only about the peace. A few days later, I turned my phone on again. More messages. This isn't funny anymore. You're becoming ridiculous. You're acting insane. If you decide to stay there, don't bother coming back. We're done. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Instead of fear or regret, a calm laugh escaped me. She really believed that after everything, I'd come running back. No. My old world, my boss, my wife, that endless cycle of pretending everything was fine could keep going without me. Here, everything made sense. People needed me. I was doing what I did best. And for the first time in a long time, life was simple, and that was more than enough. I'd always known I had useful skills, the kind you don't learn from books or classrooms, but from living, fixing, figuring things out. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't need anything but my own hands, my own mind, and the determination to keep moving without depending on anyone. That afternoon, I went back to the shed, the smell of oil still hanging in the air, a thick scent that clung to my clothes and, instead of bothering me, brought comfort. I pulled an old rag from my pocket and patiently cleaned every corner of the carburetor, making sure nothing was left behind. Then I put it back in place, turned the key, and the engine responded immediately, a steady, confident rumble, like a heartbeat saying I'd done something right. As I listened to the smooth rhythm of the engine, a smile slipped out without effort. Looks like I wasn't the one who needed fixing, I murmured to myself. For the first time in years, those words felt real. Not just something thrown to the wind, but a truth earned through effort and solitude. The weeks that followed passed like a parenthesis of peace I had never experienced. Each day had its rhythm, working with my hands, repairing whatever showed up, sleeping without interruptions, and above all, enjoying the silence. There were no notifications, no forced conversations, no invisible pressure to please anyone. Just me and the sound of trees swaying in the wind. One afternoon, after a long day fixing machines at the workshop, I drove back with the window half open, letting the cold mountain air clear my mind. I turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin and, instead of the usual quiet, saw something unexpected. Emily and her group of friends. The SUV was parked carelessly, its wheels half sunken in the mud, as if they'd braked at the last second. I stayed inside the car for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching them silently. They looked like a group straight out of a catalog for wealthy hikers, technical jackets, spotless new boots, expensive sunglasses, and the kind of fake smiles people wear when they're trying to pretend nothing is wrong. Emily stood in front, hands on her hips, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as if rehearsing a speech. Next to her, Lauren wore the same smug smile that always irritated me, the one that made everything around her look like a cheap comedy. The others, people I knew from countless parties, awkward dinners, and trips I never wanted to take, hovered a few steps behind, pretending to be uncomfortable but clearly more worried about their image than anything they'd actually done. I turned off the engine, stepped out slowly, and wiped my hands with the rag I always carried. My work shirt was stained with grease, my name stitched on the pocket, a reminder that my life, unlike theirs, wasn't a filtered social media photo. "Got lost on the way?" I asked calmly, "or did you all just remember I exist?" Emily let out a long sigh, the kind she used whenever she wanted to control the conversation. "We didn't think you'd actually stay here," she said, her voice strained. "You've made your point, right? It was just a joke that got a little out of hand." "A little?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do you mean the part where you abandoned me miles from home, or the part where you filmed it like a damn comedy skit to laugh at later?" Lauren rolled her eyes, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic. We left you food. You're fine, you survived. You should be laughing about it." "I did laugh," I replied with a cold smile. "Just not in the way you expected." Emily took a few steps toward me, trying to soften her tone, but her face betrayed her. "Look, can we not do this here? You're embarrassing me." "People have been asking where you are," Emily said. "Tell them I'm working," I replied, stepping up the porch stairs. "You know, that thing people do when they're not busy coming up with stupid ideas just to get attention." Emily's jaw tightened as if my words had landed like a punch. "So now you think you're better than us?" she asked, venom simmering under her voice. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "No," I said calmly. "I just won't pretend I'm not anymore." The comment hit like a bucket of cold water. Lauren crossed her arms and muttered unbelievable, somewhere between mockery and irritation. One of the guys stepped forward, trying to play mediator. "Come on, it doesn't have to end badly. We came because we care. We want to fix this." I leaned against the porch railing and let out a humorless laugh. "You care?" "Sure. So much that you disappeared before breakfast." "Very noble of you." Emily's fake tone finally cracked. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "It was a joke. Everyone thought it was funny. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just come home." "I am home," I said simply, not moving an inch. Her expression shifted from guilty discomfort to restrained fury. "Don't start with that. You don't belong here. Do you even have a job? A house?" "I had a job," I interrupted. "And the house?" "Well, now you can pay for it on your own." "I'm not planning on going back." "Stop acting like a child," she screamed. "This was supposed to teach you a lesson." I spoke slowly, without any need to defend myself anymore. "Yeah. And I learned. You said I needed to build character, and that's exactly what I did." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. No one knew what to say. Even Lauren, who always had some acidic comment ready, stayed quiet. I stepped off the porch with steady steps and walked toward my car, unhurried, unbothered. "You know what's funny?" I said, turning back to them. "You all thought I'd beg to come back, thought I'd collapse without you, but you did me a favor. You removed all the noise that kept me from thinking, and without that noise, I finally saw what actually matters." Emily frowned and stepped forward. "And what's that?" she asked sharply. "My life. My peace. The part of me you kept trying to fix was never broken. What kept breaking, over and over, were your expectations." I saw it the moment her lips began to tremble. Her perfect facade cracked like glass under pressure. The performance she'd rehearsed to manipulate me fell apart as fast as it once made me doubt myself. Emily tried to keep her composure, but her voice faltered. "You're destroying everything we built together." "What did we build, Emily?" I asked without raising my voice. "A marriage where I pretended to smile in front of your friends? A hollow routine where I became nothing but an accessory in your life? You didn't build anything, you just maintained a pretty shell." She began to cry. Maybe the tears were real, maybe it was another attempt at manipulation. I no longer cared enough to tell the difference. "I just wanted you to be stronger," she whispered. "You got what you wanted," I replied calmly. "I'm stronger, but not because of you." The silence that followed was heavy. Only the wind through the trees and the old porch wood creaking under my boot made any sound. Lauren scoffed, impatient. "I can't believe this. We came all the way here for nothing." "Yeah," I said emotionlessly. "But thanks for dropping by. I was thinking about sending a thank you card." Emily looked at me like she was standing in front of a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe for the first time she was seeing the version of me who didn't kneel, didn't apologize, and didn't beg for approval. When they realized they wouldn't get anything out of me, they gave up. Emily was the first to turn around, mumbling something I couldn't hear. The others followed her to the SUV. Doors slammed, the engine roared, and within seconds they disappeared down the dirt road, leaving nothing but dust behind. I looked down at my hands still stained with grease and couldn't hold back a laugh. "Build character, huh?" I murmured. "Yeah, you actually managed that." I went back inside, made myself some coffee, and sat by the window. The silence no longer felt threatening. It was solid, earned. Not emptiness, mine. They wanted me to prove something, and I did. Just not the way they expected. 6 months later, everything had changed. The cabin was no longer a temporary refuge, it was my home. My professional life took an unexpected turn too. Sean, the man from the diner, introduced me to Michael, an older mechanic who'd been working alone in his little workshop for decades. He had the same sense of humor I did, the same work ethic, the same limited patience for customers who thought duct tape could fix an engine. After a few weeks helping Michael, he suggested we share the workshop. We called the place Iron Arado, named after the nearby trail and because the name just felt strong. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. People started showing up on their own, coming from neighboring towns. By the end of the first month, we were packed with work. For the first time in a long time, I felt respect. Real respect. Eventually, the story reached Emily. A friend told me what she'd been saying, that I'd lost my mind, that I couldn't handle the pressures of life, and that she, the poor victim, had only ever tried to save me. Well, if having my home, my business, and my peace counted as a breakdown, then they could officially declare me broken. I didn't correct anything. I didn't need to. As the months passed, I became part of the community. When a full year had gone by since that night, I decided to celebrate in my own way. It wasn't some nostalgic party or a petty revenge, it was a quiet thank you to the people who helped me build a new life without even realizing it. I fired up the grill in front of the cabin and invited Sean, Michael, the regulars from the diner, the shop owner, and Frank, the old man who'd helped me on my very first day there. The night filled with simple conversations, genuine laughter, and improvised music playing from an old radio. In the middle of it all, my phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. "I heard you're doing well. I hope you're happy." No signature needed. I knew exactly who it was. I looked around, real people, honest faces, kids playing under the stars. Instead of replying with words, I turned the phone off, set it aside, and went back to the grill. I didn't need to justify myself. I didn't need to prove anything. Silence was my answer. As the smoke rose and laughter filled the air, I understood something that had never been clear before. I hadn't been abandoned, I had finally been set free. It wasn't a bitter ending, but the beginning of a life without their shadow over me. And this time, I wasn't looking back.
Reddit relics comment. Funny, isn't it? They wanted to teach him a lesson. Well, he did learn something. Turns out peace is a hell of a lot cheaper than couples therapy, silence is worth more than 1,000 fake apologies, and grease on your hands washes off easily, unlike the hypocrisy they carry in their souls. In the end, their abandonment was the best gift he ever got. And to think it all started with a little note saying builds character. Yeah, well, it did. They just never imagined it would be built on the ruins of their own behavior.